Imagine a weapon so fast and so elusive that it does not simply fly toward its target, but dances across the sky at 6 times the speed of sound, constantly shifting its path to confuse the most advanced radar systems on the planet. This is not a scene from a science fiction film, but a reality that high-ranking military officials in the West have had to reckon with for over 2 decades. The Iskander missile system is not just a piece of artillery, it is a psychological shadow that hangs over the entire European continent, a ghost that can appear from nowhere and strike with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel from 500 kilometers away. What makes this machine truly terrifying is not just its speed or its power, but the fact that it was born in the ruins of a collapsed empire, designed by men who refused to let their engineering legacy die along with their country. This is the story of how a single missile became the ultimate argument in modern geopolitics and how its creators cheated the laws of physics to build something that was never supposed to exist. To truly grasp the magnitude of the Iskander, one must first understand the shadow cast by its predecessor, the 9K 714 Oka. In the early 1980s, the Oka was the undisputed king of the tactical battlefield. It was a masterpiece of Soviet engineering, capable of hitting targets with incredible accuracy and possessing a flight profile that made it nearly impossible to intercept. The Americans were so terrified of the Oka that during the negotiations for the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty in 1987, they made its destruction a non-negotiable condition. Even though the Oka's maximum range was technically 400 kilometers, placing it below the 500-kilometer threshold of the treaty, the Soviet leadership under Mikhail Gorbachev agreed to scrap it as a gesture of goodwill. For the engineers at the Design Bureau of Machine Building in Kolomna, this was a day of mourning. They watched as their life's work was cut apart by industrial saws, but in the silence of those workshops, a new and far more dangerous idea was already beginning to take shape. The scene in Kolomna during those months was one of quiet, simmering resentment. Sergey Nepobedimiy, the legendary head of the bureau, was a man whose very name meant invincible in the Russian language. He had spent decades designing the weapons that defined the Cold War, from the first anti-tank guided missiles to the man-portable Strela systems that haunted NATO pilots in every corner of the globe. When the Oka was destroyed, Nepobedimiy did not fall into despair. Instead, he channeled his fury into a project that would bypass every treaty and every defense system the West could conceive. He knew that the next war would not be fought with masses of tanks alone, but with information and precision. He envisioned a system that could sit hidden in a forest, receive a set of coordinates from a satellite or a drone, and deliver a devastating blow within minutes. This was the beginning of the Iskander, a project born from the ashes of a betrayed masterpiece, fueled by the professional pride of men who felt their country was being dismantled piece by piece. But the early 1990s were not a time for grand military ambitions. As the Soviet Union fractured into 15 separate nations, the massive industrial complex that supported designers like Nepobedimiy began to disintegrate. Funding vanished overnight. Factories that once built high-precision electronics were suddenly trying to manufacture spoons and pans just to survive. In Kolomna, the engineers faced a choice. They could take their secrets to the West for a comfortable life, or they could stay and work for a country that could no longer pay them. Many stayed. They worked in offices where the temperature dropped below freezing in the winter, wearing thick coats and gloves while they sketched out the trajectories of a hypersonic future. They were motivated by a singular goal: to ensure that the loss of the Oka was not the end of Russian rocket science. They held on to their blueprints like sacred texts, waiting for the day when the state would remember its need for a sword. The engineering challenges were staggering. even for men of their experience. To make a missile that could overcome modern air defenses, it had to be more than just fast. It had to be smart. The team decided on a quasi-ballistic flight path, a concept that exists at the very edge of aerodynamic possibility. Unlike a standard ballistic missile, which follows a predictable parabola into space and back, the Iskander would never leave the atmosphere. It would stay at an altitude of about 50 kilometers, where the air is thin enough for high speed, but thick enough for control surfaces to work. This meant the missile would be under constant control from launch to impact. To achieve this, they had to develop heat-resistant alloys that could survive the friction of Mach 6, where the leading edges of the missile would glow white-hot, reaching temperatures that would melt ordinary steel in seconds. The technical puzzle was so complex that many younger engineers doubted it could be solved without the vast resources of the old Soviet state. As the design progressed through the mid-1990s, the engineers encountered the problem of maneuverability. If a missile moves in a straight line, it can be intercepted by a computer that predicts its future position. Therefore, the Iskander had to be able to dodge. They engineered a system of gas dynamic and aerodynamic vanes that allowed the missile to pull maneuvers at 30 g-forces. To put that in perspective, the most advanced fighter jets in the world are limited to 9 g-forces to prevent the pilot's heart from failing or their blood from pooling in their feet. The Iskander, being unmanned, could ignore the biological limits of the human body. During its terminal phase, as it dives toward the target, it performs random, violent shifts in its path, making it a nightmare for the computer algorithms of interceptor missiles, like the American Patriot. The defenders are forced to guess where the missile will be, and at hypersonic speeds, a single millisecond of error means a total miss. But the missile was only one half of the equation. It needed a carriage that could go anywhere and hide from anything. The task of creating the mobile launcher fell to the designers at the Minsk Wheel Tractor Plant in Belarus. They produced the MZKT-7930, a massive 8-wheeled beast powered by a 500-horsepower diesel engine. This vehicle, known as the Astrolog, was designed to carry 2 missiles, each weighing nearly 4,000 kilograms, across terrain that would stop a conventional truck. The suspension was engineered to be independent on all 8 wheels, allowing the truck to crawl over boulders and through deep marshes without tipping. This mobility was the Iskander's primary defense. A battery could hide in a dense forest, masked from thermal imaging by the trees and special camouflage nets, and launch its payload before the enemy even knew they were in the area. It was a weapon of the shadows, designed to strike and vanish before the smoke had cleared. The guidance system was perhaps the most secretive and complex part of the entire project, developed during a time when Russia was lagging behind in digital microelectronics. Yet the engineers managed to create an optical correlator system that was decades ahead of its time. As the missile descends, a camera in its nose captures images of the ground in high resolution. An onboard computer compares these images with a preloaded digital map of the target area. This allows the missile to correct its path in real time, accounting for wind, atmospheric density, and even the target's movement. This system meant the Iskander did not rely solely on GPS, which could be jammed or spoofed by an advanced adversary. It used its own eyes to find its prey. The accuracy they achieved was stunning. A missile fired from 500 kilometers away could hit a target with a circular error probable of just 5 to 7 meters. Imagine throwing a dart from 5 miles away and hitting the center of a postage stamp. That is the level of precision we are talking about. When the first full-scale tests began at the Kapustin Yar range in the late 90s, the atmosphere was far from celebratory. The Russian military was in a state of decay, and the government was skeptical of spending billions on a new rocket when soldiers were going without pay. The first launch was a moment of pure, unadulterated tension. The massive 8-wheeled launcher rumbled into position, its hydraulic jacks sinking into the parched earth of the steppe. The two missiles stood vertical, like twin towers of steel against the pale blue sky. When the command was given, the ignition was not a roar, but a violent explosion of white smoke and orange flame that scorched the concrete launch pad. The missile did not slowly lift off, it leaped into the sky, disappearing from sight in a heartbeat. The engineers watched the telemetry screens with bated breath, their hands shaking as the data flowed in. The missile reached its peak altitude, leveled off, and began its frantic, zigzagging dance. When the report came back from the target area, the missile had struck the center of a simulated command bunker, turning it into a crater of twisted metal. Euphoria was short-lived, however. Even with successful tests, the project faced a wall of bureaucratic indifference and lack of funds. For years, the production lines moved at a glacial pace. Only a few dozen missiles were produced, and they were often used more as bargaining chips in diplomatic disputes than as functional military assets. The West watched with a mixture of curiosity and dismissal, believing that the Russian Federation would never be able to afford a full-scale deployment of such a complex system. But they underestimated the determination of the men in Kolomna and the shifting winds of global politics. Throughout the early 2000s, as oil prices rose and the Russian economy began to stabilize, the Iskander project was suddenly given top priority. It became the centerpiece of a new military doctrine, the concept of non-nuclear deterrence.
The philosophy behind this doctrine was simple and brutal. If you have a weapon that can destroy an enemy's airfields, ports, and command centers with conventional explosives before they can react, you don't need a nuclear war to win. You simply make the cost of conflict so high that the enemy chooses not to fight. The Iskander was the perfect tool for this strategy. It could target the very brain of a modern military, decapitating its command structure in the opening minutes of a war. To make the system even more versatile, the Russians introduced a new variant, the Iskander-K. While the original Iskander-M fired a quasi-ballistic missile that stayed high in the atmosphere, the K version fired the 9M728 cruise missile. This missile flew just a few meters above the ground, following the contours of the Earth to hide from radar. By putting both of these systems on the same mobile launcher, the designers created a tactical paradox for any defender. If the enemy tuned their radar to look for the high-speed diving threat from above, they would miss the low-flying cruise missiles sneaking in from the side. It was a two-pronged attack that virtually guaranteed at least one missile would reach its target. This was the moment the Iskander moved from being a technical achievement to a strategic nightmare for NATO planners. The geopolitical weight of the Iskander became undeniable during the mid-2010s when the system was deployed to the Kaliningrad enclave. This small piece of Russian territory, wedged between Poland and Lithuania, suddenly became the most dangerous piece of real estate in Europe. From Kaliningrad, Iskander missiles could reach almost any major military base or port in northern and central Europe within minutes. This created what military analysts call an anti-access area denial bubble. It effectively told NATO that in the event of a conflict, their logistical hubs would be destroyed before a single tank could roll out of its garage. The presence of the Iskander turned Kaliningrad into an unsinkable missile cruiser, a permanent thorn in the side of Western strategic planners. It was a masterclass in how a relatively small number of high-tech assets could achieve the same strategic effect as a massive invasion force. The human cost of this project remained hidden behind the walls of the secret cities where the missiles were built. The designers and technicians lived lives of quiet anonymity, their contributions known only to a few high-ranking officials in the Kremlin. Sergey Nepobedimiy, even in his final years, remained an active advisor to the Bureau, often seen walking through the design halls with a cane, but still possessing the sharp mind that had outsmarted the world's best physicists. He saw the Iskander as his ultimate triumph, a weapon that ensured his country would never again be forced to destroy its own defenses as a gesture of goodwill to a perceived friend. He understood that in the world of power politics, goodwill is only respected when it is backed by an invincible sword. He passed away in 2014, just as the system he created was becoming the focal point of a new era of global tension.
The economic irony of the Iskander is perhaps its most fascinating aspect. A single Patriot missile battery, which is designed to defend against such threats, costs billions of dollars to develop and maintain. Each interceptor missile costs millions. Yet, the Iskander is designed to be relatively cheap and easy to produce in large numbers. It forces the adversary into a ruinous economic cycle. They must spend $10 on defense for every $1 Russia spends on offense. On top of that, the defense is never guaranteed to work. The Iskander includes sophisticated electronic warfare suites that can jam the radars of intercepting missiles as they approach. It is the ultimate asymmetric weapon, a tool that allows a smaller military to paralyze a much larger one through the sheer threat of precision strikes that cannot be reliably stopped. When the Iskander finally saw combat, the theoretical data was replaced by the grim reality of the battlefield. In the mountains of the Caucasus and later in the deserts of Syria, the system proved its worth with clinical efficiency. In Syria, Iskander missiles were used to target high-value insurgent facilities with terrifying precision from hundreds of kilometers away. Videos emerged showing missiles striking buildings with such accuracy that they seemed to be guided by an invisible hand. These were not just tests, they were demonstrations for the global arms market. Countries around the world began to realize that the Iskander was the most effective tactical weapon ever created. Export versions, known as the Iskander-E, were developed with a slightly reduced range of 280 kilometers to comply with international agreements, and they were quickly sought after by nations looking for a way to counter superior air forces.
The technical evolution of the system did not stop with its initial success. Engineers began working on ways to integrate artificial intelligence into the guidance systems, allowing the missiles to communicate with each other mid-flight. Imagine a swarm of 4 Iskanders launched at a carrier group. One missile could take the lead, acting as a scout and drawing the enemy's radar, while the other 3 adjusted their paths based on the data the first one provided. This level of coordination would make the system even more lethal, turning each launch into a coordinated pack hunt. The solid-fuel rocket motors were also refined, using new chemical compositions that allowed for even higher speeds and longer burn times, pushing the missile's performance into the true hypersonic realm, where the air itself becomes a barrier as hard as concrete. But the real nightmare for defenders began when the Russians integrated the Iskander into their wider network of sensors. Now the missile was no longer dependent on its own camera or preloaded maps. It could receive mid-course updates from Beriev A-50 early warning aircraft, from orbiting satellites, or even from special forces teams on the ground with laser designators. This meant an Iskander could be launched toward a general area and then redirected to a specific moving target, like a train carrying supplies or a mobile command post, while it was already mid-flight. This capability turned a long-range missile into a tactical sniper rifle, capable of hitting a moving target 500 kilometers away. The psychological pressure this exerts on a commander in the field is immense. They know that at any moment the sky could fall, and there is no place to hide.
The production of these machines is a marvel of industrial organization. Each missile is assembled in a clean room environment where the slightest speck of dust could cause a failure in the delicate guidance electronics. The solid fuel is poured into the missile casing in a vacuum to prevent any air bubbles that could cause an uneven burn and lead to an explosion on the launch pad. The outer skin of the missile is hand-finished to ensure that the stealth coating is perfectly smooth, as any imperfection would increase its radar cross-section.
The men and women who build these missiles take a fierce pride in their work, seeing themselves as the direct heirs to the great Soviet scientists who put the first man in space. To them, the Iskander is not a weapon of war, but a shield for their civilization. The legacy of the Iskander is one of survival and adaptation. It is a machine that was born in a time of national weakness to provide a guarantee of national strength. It represents the pinnacle of a specific school of engineering that prioritizes cleverness and agility over brute force. When you see these massive green vehicles rolling through Red Square during a parade, you are looking at more than just a piece of military hardware. You are looking at the culmination of 30 years of engineering defiance, a bridge between the cold calculations of the Soviet era and the high-tech realities of the 21st century. The laws of physics say that a heavy object traveling at several kilometers per second should be easy to track, but the Iskander proves that with enough ingenuity, those laws can be bent until they break.
The history of the Iskander teaches us that in the world of military technology, victory does not always go to the side with the most resources, but to the side that can most effectively innovate under pressure. By focusing on maneuverability, stealth, and multimodal guidance, the designers created a tool that redefined the boundaries of what a tactical missile could be. It serves as a reminder that the most dangerous weapons are often those born out of necessity and a refusal to accept defeat. The lesson of the Iskander is that strategic balance is not a static thing, but a constant race between the shield and the sword. And for now, the sword designed in Kolomna remains one of the sharpest and most unpredictable in the world. It is a weapon that has achieved its primary goal. It has made the world stop and listen. Today, the Iskander stands as a testament to the fact that technical brilliance can survive even the most catastrophic political collapses. It remains the silent sentinel of the modern era, a weapon whose greatest power lies in the fact that its potential targets spend every day hoping they never have to see it in action. The story of its creation, from the betrayal of the Oka to the triumphs in the Syrian desert, is a chronicle of human will and engineering genius. It is a story that is still being written as new variants and new technologies ensure that the Iskander will remain a dominant force on the world stage for decades to come. The ghost in the machine is still there, dancing across the hypersonic edge of the atmosphere, waiting for a command that everyone hopes will never be given. In the quiet halls of the Kolomna Bureau, the work continues. The next generation of engineers, some of whom were not even born when Sergey Nepobedimiy was fighting for the project's survival, now sit at modern computer workstations. They use advanced simulations to model the flow of plasma around the missile's nose and to design even more complex maneuvers. They know the weight of the legacy they carry. They know that the world is watching. And they know that as long as the Iskander stands ready, their country's voice will be heard. The sword is polished, the ghost is ready, and the history of warfare has been changed forever by a missile that refused to be destroyed. If you found this deep dive into the engineering, politics, and drama of the Iskander missile system fascinating, please consider supporting the channel by leaving a like and sharing your thoughts in the comments. We want to know which piece of military technology you would like us to investigate next. Is there a tank, a plane, or a ship whose story deserves to be told in this much detail? Your engagement helps us continue to bring these long-form chronicles to life, so do not forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell to stay updated on our upcoming scripts. Thank you for your time, and we will see you in the next chapter of military history where the machines of war meet the stories of the people who built them.